Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Dr. Harry's Healthy Corner. I'm sorry I've been gone for past few Wednesdays. I've not been able to do this, and I really missed doing it. For those of you who have followed me on Facebook and YouTube, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. You will find out that I've been just a little busy lately, and but I'm so happy to be back. And this week, what I want to talk about is why it's important to get rid of toxicity in your life if you are working on healing and getting healthier. So I tend to look at toxicity this way. It is really like continuing to pour fuel onto a fire while we are trying to put it out. So we cannot heal in the same environment that has made us sick. So it may not be a physical illness that you're experiencing, or maybe it is. It may be that your energy is not as good as you would like it to be. It may be that you're not sleeping as well. It may be that you're not feeling on purpose. It may be you're not feeling on task. And a recent study that I looked at recently just says that feeling that you have purpose and feeling that you're on task and really appreciating who you are is actually really important, is really an important first step for getting healthier. It says that people who felt a sense of purpose actually were healthier, and they were able to make changes more steadily. So it's important to understand that and to understand why toxic things may be detrimental to your health. So how do we define toxicity? Let's talk a little bit about toxicity. When we think toxic, we think poisonous, right? Because toxicity, toxic things poison us. Now, as a former ER physician, or I'm still an ER physician, but as a former practicing ER physician, we were very concerned when we thought that somebody was poisoned. And so we had all the antidotes ready, and we knew about antidotes, and we called the Poison Control Center, and we understood that form of toxicity. But when toxicity is insidious and is in our lives, and it slowly and methodically steals away who we are, that's the most concerning form of toxicity. So toxicity can come in many forms, right? So it can be environmental, it can be circumstantial, or perhaps where you live or where you work. And most importantly, one of the most important things, it can be coming from your negative chatter that we tend to carry on with ourselves. So that's a toxicity that we cannot get rid of. That's a toxicity that is with us 24/7. That's actually the most important toxicity that we need to address. Toxicity can also come from the people that are surrounding you. If after being around someone, you constantly feel, when you leave that space and you feel depleted and you feel depressed and you feel not on purpose, that person is potentially toxic to you. So let's address initially just a few forms of toxicity in a general sense. So we know about certain foods, and they may not be like toxic mushrooms or poisonous mushrooms, but there are certain foods that methodically steal away our health, that methodically decrease our energy levels, and that methodically it increases our risk for chronic illnesses. So foods that we're talking about in a general sense, we're talking about trans fats, right? So trans fats or hydrogenated fats, that's another thing to look for. So when you're looking at the labels, when you pick up some food and you want to know what's in it, and you turn around to look at the labels, if it says hydrogenated fats or if it says trans fats, then you will know that that particular food is potentially toxic. And here's why. Because trans fats is like putting rancid oil or all that oil that you have used before into your system. Now, remember your car and you've got to change the oil every 3 months or so? Some of us go a little bit longer, I will have to admit, but you do have to change that oil and put in fresh oil so that everything functions smoothly. Well, what trans fats does is that it prevents your cells from functioning smoothly. So the areas that are significantly impacted by this by trans fats or hydrogenated fats is brain function. And so trans fats can interfere with the way our brain cells communicate with each other. And this can cause issues potentially with memory and even with our moods. And so that's one form of toxicity. Other things that we might think about is that we might think about plastic containers, and that's another form of potentially things. And remember, I'm not saying that these are things that will poison you immediately, but they can potentially interfere with the way your body functions normally. And so plastic containers that contains the substance BPA, that interferes with the way your endocrine system functions. What the heck is an endocrine system? Well, part of that is your thyroid function, right? And the thyroid function is like it's like the motor of the car. It helps everything to run super smoothly. And so if your thyroid is not functioning well, then you might be prone to things such as, again, decreased moods. You notice there's a common theme here. So toxicity really can impact your moods. So we got decreased moods and we have increased weight. Of course, there are many things that can contribute to increased weight or difficulty losing weight. But did you know that also it can interfere with your heart function as well? The heart doesn't pump as well, and so you might be predisposed to heart function or heart failure even. And your skin gets impacted because things are not working well. The skin can become very dry. You can start losing hair. And while all of these things may seem to be uh, appearance related, they're not. They're just a sign that the body is not functioning well. So these are some of the things that we can be exposed to that can be toxic to us with prolonged use over time. Now, heavy metals, that's a little, but I know many people are concerned about heavy metals, and rightfully so, because we do know that there's certain metals that can interfere with brain function. For example, we do know that in children and in adults that increased levels of lead can potentially interfere with brain function and does for children. So it increases, it affects the way the brain functions and the brain forms. And it can also seem to impact as well the way the body, the way the adult brain functions. And there's some concern that heavy metal may also contribute to inflammatory conditions. So where can you be exposed to things like heavy metals? Well, we know, of course, paint, or very old paint, because newer paint, that tends not to be the problem. But the concern is that these things may also be in our cosmetics. And so there was, I believe it was quite a few years ago when there was some concern about heavy metals being in particularly in our lipsticks, for example. And there were some concerns about that as well. So other things that could be toxic, do you know that if you don't have good oral health and you have inflammation of the gums, that this actually has been linked with developing dementia and Alzheimer's later on in life. So this is really important to know. This has also been linked in some studies with increased risk of cardiovascular illness or clotting of the arteries, or increased inflammation in the arteries. So as you can see, there are a multitude of things that can contribute on a daily basis that we are exposed to that could potentially be hindering our ability to feel better. So let's say, for example, that you're working with your physician and you're trying to feel better, and your lab tests, etc., are coming back normal. Well, you might want to take a look in your environment and see what things are continuing to pour gasoline on the very thing that you're trying to heal. Now, I want to talk a little bit about relationships that could potentially be a toxic. I'm sure that along the way, if you've lived long enough, you've probably experienced after you've been around certain individuals or in certain situations that you leave feeling more tired and more fatigued. Take a look at that relationship. See if it's a nourishing relationship, if it's supported relationship. Your relationships are important. Your social environment is important. So if you are constantly surrounded um, by people who don't make you feel supported, or worse yet, who actually make you feel less than, then that really can cause significant health issues and can increase your stress levels, which then can cause changes in the body. Now, the big one we talked about was negative self-chatter. Who is a person that is with you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year? That person is you. What you say to yourself really matters. What you say to yourself, the body incorporates and expresses. So it is like, if there's a persistent self-critical dialogue that you have with yourself, you need to become aware of that, because that might be the thing that is sabotaging your ability to do the things that you want to do. So for example, if you are wanting to, if you are working on getting into a new activity program, or you just want to become more active in general, then you want to tell yourself that it can be done. You want to tell yourself that it happens in little steps. You never want to say that I'm never going to be able to do it, and I am too, whatever it is, whatever negative quality it is, fill in the blanks, because you will not be able to get from point A to point B. So negative self-talk is really one of the biggest stressors. And when you engage that stress system, that fight or flight system, what you're doing is causing, at least part of what you're doing, is causing your stress hormonal levels to become erratic. And so normally, stress is not all bad. Of course, some stress keeps us alert, keeps us awake, and keeps us being able to function normally. But negative, self-critical, constant stress can cause our stress hormones to come out at the wrong time. And studies say that actually predisposes us to increase chronic illness, and also increased risk of weight gain, increased risk of inflammation, and elevated stress hormonal levels can impact memories. So it's really important to recognize the thing in your life that may be interfering with your ability to take the steps that you need to take or that you want to take. These are little things that could be interfering with your health that you may not even be aware of. So what we want to do is look at the foods that we're eating, make sure that they're nourishing to us and they've got good nutrients, and they, most importantly, that they're not stealing away our health. So for example, we talked about a few things, but other things that you might want to put on this list is something like processed meats. We know that they can increase our risk of certain cancers, such as colon cancer, for example. We know foods that are cooked at significantly high temperatures can do this as well. And so you're really kind of taking a look at your entire environment. Once you've done that, are you exposing yourself to fresh air? Is there something in your environment? For example, those of us who are prone to allergies, or those of us who are not, if we're constantly being exposed to things like pesticides and herbicides on a continual basis, the body does have a capacity. We do have the capacity to handle many things that are thrown at us, but then you have to ask yourself, where is your limit? Because that's ultimately what toxic things can do, is they can lower your limit or lower your ability to clear things out. So what the body is able to do, if something comes in that's not right, doesn't feel right, doesn't sit right, the goal is to kind of process that thing and get rid of it. But if the body's not able to do that, that's when that thing can become potentially toxic to us. So I just want to take this time to say hi to a few people, and then we'll continue to see if there are any questions so far. Let's see. We have, hi, Mrs. Rogers. Good evening, Denise and Latina. As always, good to see you. And this is the point really where if you have any questions about things that could potentially be doing that, please feel free to ask me those questions, and I'll be happy to answer those things for you. Again, this is not to say that we're fragile things that cannot be exposed to our environment, but it is to say that each individual has a limit of what they can handle, and things potentially become a problem when you arrive at that limit. So some of us are able to process more things, and some of us are not able to do so. And so oftentimes, if you're not able to clear things as well as perhaps your friend, you might be more predisposed to developing an illness secondary to that. So let me just take a look here. Hi, Diane and Shirley. Yeah, so interestingly about the gum, someone mentioned that. So it's important to know that your mouth health is part of your health. And oftentimes we tend to separate them because we do have a different specialist for that, right? We do have our dentist. And oftentimes we tend not to prioritize our oral health. And our oral health actually is part of our health. And if we have issues with inflammation in our mouth, that may be reflective of inflammation that might be going on elsewhere. And so there might also be, for example, there's some bacteria in the mouth that can cause gingivitis and gum inflammation that have also been linked with some other chronic illnesses as well. That's why it's really important to consider your mouth health as part of your health. So odd things that could be, did you know that, again, too much sun can be toxic to you? It's really, toxicity can be because of excessive amounts of things or just the wrong type of things. So if our body is able to recognize something, it's able to process it. If it's not able to recognize it, then it cannot process it. So that's the important thing to know. And importantly also is that negative thinking is also very toxic. And other foods, other environmental things that could be potentially toxic, of course, in excess is alcohol, because we know alcohol can be toxic as in excess, and to some individuals even in small amounts. And again, if the body's not able to process it properly, because alcohol can have many metabolites or many things that it's broken down into as we process it. And so oftentimes some of those things can cause damage to other parts of the body, such as the brain and the eyes, and can interfere with our bodies being able to function normally. So things that everyone knows are toxic, of course, are cigarettes, and we may not consider cigarettes to be classified as toxic, but keep in mind anything that causes damage to the body and causes it not to function well is toxic to your body. So it's not necessary. So I think oftentimes what happens is that we're thinking it's not poisonous, but toxicity, chronic toxicity is the concern for us. So things like cigarettes and alcohol, we are very much aware that those can be toxic. Things we may not be aware of, negative thinking, plastic containers that contain BPA, environmental exposures, to certain things such as pesticides and herbicides, and because these things really interfere with the normal functioning of our body. So they stop our cells from functioning normally, like our endocrine cells. So we talked about the thyroid, for example. The adrenal glands is another endocrine system. So our endocrine system is super important to us. So those things can potentially interfere with that. And then we talk about foods that could be potentially toxic and ingredients that can be potentially toxic. For example, many people ask me about MSG, and some people can tolerate MSG and some people cannot tolerate MSG. And so then that creates a symptom in them. So the key thing is to be aware of it, limit processed foods as much as possible. And so that way, then you really don't have to be concerned about it. Hydration helps to get rid of toxicity. And one of the things that one of the early things that in medical school we talked about hydration in terms of even helping to cleanse the system. So hydration can help with toxicity when you're well hydrated, and this is Mental Health Awareness Month. Your mental health is so important, and so depression is something that can interfere with your ability to get better physically. Depression is very much linked to physical illness, such as heart disease. People do not recover as well from illnesses. It is very much linked with not doing so well. For example, if you're diagnosed with a malignancy and you're receiving treatment, depression can be a part of that. And so anxiety falls into that category, depression falls into that category. And if you're experiencing any of these symptoms, and please seek help, because it's a sign of strength and not a sign of weakness. Because in your journey to get better, whether it's because you have chronic pain, just please know that your mental health is an important part of that. So let's see if we have any questions here. Okay. Yes, the water we drink. Yes, that's a very good question. Water can be contaminated, as we've seen from several stories that actually is occurring in our country, not abroad. So water can be contaminated. Water can. That's why we treat our water, of course, and we need to not only hydrate but be aware of what water we're drinking. So the question then would follow up. Many people ask me about alkaline water, and I try to remind people that the body operates within a certain pH, and if your body can be too acidic, then it can also be too alkaline. So it's something that you want to be aware of. You want to be aware also that your digestive system works at a certain pH at a certain time. So your digestive system is, for your stomach, for example, needs to be acidic at a certain time, and then it needs to be alkaline at a certain time for it to be functioning normally, starting the digestive process and moving on. So be aware that overconsumption of alkaline water could potentially be an issue. So I usually encourage people, when we're talking about having the body in a healthy state, eating lots of plant-based foods naturally does that. And so that is usually what I tend to focus on with that. Hi, Vicky. Good of you to check in. So your water is important. Filtered water, of course, is important. So that is that answer to that question. Let's see if there's any more question here. Okay. So we're talking about the type of waters, and perhaps, we're definitely getting into some different topics here. So what is the best way to filter your water, right? That is always a question, right? So is it distilled water? Somebody's asking about distilled water. I wouldn't encourage drinking a lot of drinking distilled water, because it tends to be devoid of any kind of minerals and actually can cause some leaching of some minerals. So distilled water is perhaps not best. There's reverse osmosis water, and that's something else we can get into for another day. I would also say that if if just simply filtering your water may just help as well. So you really don't have to get into anything super expensive, as reverse osmosis systems can be very, very expensive. But I would say, no, let's not drink distilled water. I don't think that drinking distilled water is a good idea. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so I don't see any more questions. Hi, Nadine. So I just really wanted to take a brief moment here to talk about just being aware of what else may be happening in your life. Of course, you need to follow. Of course, going to get your annual visits is important, and trying to find out what's physically wrong. But sometimes understanding that your system is not in isolation. It interacts with everything around it. It interacts with your entire environment. So that would mean people that you interact with in a daily basis. It would be your physical environment as well, and that includes the foods you eat. That includes what type of water you drink. That includes how you sleep. That includes how you think and feel about yourself. So all of those things really contribute to your health, and oftentimes I feel that sometimes what I hear from my patients is that they're sometimes very surprised at the impact that things that they have been living with for such a long time is having on your health. So sometimes you may be living with in a situation for such a long time, you may not be aware that it is impacting your health until you're able to change it. So reach out to your physician and find a physician that you're comfortable working with. So you are able to really have a discussion with them about these things. And again, it's important to take care of yourselves. Be aware of your thoughts because they're with you all the time. Again, we have about 70,000 thoughts a day, according to USC. And those thoughts are really important, so they can either support you or they can really contribute towards your pain or towards your moods. So be aware of them. If you keep in mind, I always ask you to equate it with this. If you have a friend or a loved one, and you constantly see anyone being critical to them, constantly speaking to them in a demeaning a manner, this probably will not sit very well with you, and you would recognize that this is not really conducive to that person's not only self-esteem, but to them feeling good and being able to do things in a positive way. So think about yourself in that way. If you're constantly being critical and to yourself, and if you're constantly saying demeaning things, and if you're constantly speaking to yourself in a very judgmental way, then the odds are that you really won't feel the motivation and the inspiration to make positive changes in your life. So it's important to be aware of that. When you love someone, you will do almost anything for them. So I just want you to realize that that applies to you as well, and that your thoughts can be extremely toxic to you. If you are concerned about particular things, I know there are many things out there that you've seen and you've heard about, and you've always been wondering about, like, is apple cider vinegar good? How can heavy metals impact me? Should I get dental fillings removed? Can they be potentially a problem for me? All of these things, of course, are questions that we can address. If I might even have a topic just particularly dedicated to those things, to answering those questions, if you send them to me, and I'll know specifically which ones you're concerned about, and have those answers for you. But for today, if you take away nothing, I want you to be able to take away the fact that the one thing that is in your control to change is the way you think about yourself. So first become aware of that. Okay, so if we have no further questions, next week, I won't be on next week because I'll be traveling. For those of you who know me, you know my kids are graduating, so I'll be doing a bit of that. So the next time we will be doing it next Wednesday. If you have anything in particular that you want to talk about, please let me know. Otherwise, we will be talking about another health topic. What I tend to do is alternate a really serious health topic like blood pressure, and then we talk about the next time we talk about how the way you feel about yourself can impact your health. So next week, what I wanted to talk about next week is strokes. And because many of you might be aware of the recent passing of Mr. John Singleton, who was only 51 years of age, and he passed from having a stroke or a cerebrovascular accident, as we call it, a CVA. And that is a really young age, in my opinion, of course, to have this impact you. So what are some of the things that we can do and be aware of in order to decrease our risk of strokes? What are some of the steps that we can take to do that? What are some of the lifestyle changes that we can do? What are some questions that we can ask our physicians? What are some numbers that we need to be looking at and to get under control? So I think next week, not next week, but the week after next, that will be our topic. If you have any particular questions about that, please note them now, and then you'll be able to ask me at that time. So until then, I will see you the week after on Wednesday at 7:30. Let's see. Okay, I have one question. Let me answer this. Okay, so someone talks about being that they find themselves being very moody and having mood swings. So it's important, and questions that I might ask at that point is how old are you? What kind of periods do you experience? Are they regular? Are there medications you're taking? What is family history? Because labile moods can be secondary to many things, and so important to recognize that, because the first step is recognizing it. Because many people who are able to many people are not even able to identify themselves as being moody. It's usually the person that they live with or a loved one who is able to say, you know, I think your moods seem to be up and down. And moody can mean so many different things to many people. You know, moody can mean feeling depressed. It can be feeling irritable. It can be going from happiness to irritability. So there's so many ways. So that would be one of the things that I would sit down and ask those questions. What is it that means to you? When does it occur? When does it seem to be triggered? Because absolutely it does impact your health, and health conditions can also contribute to this. So it's important to speak with your physician about that, because even certain nutrient deficiencies can contribute towards moodiness as well. Well, thank you. I'm glad this topic is helpful. Let's see if we have any more questions here. Thank you, Mrs. Rogers. I appreciate all of you joining me tonight, and I will see you in 2 weeks on Wednesday. And at that time, I want to talk about how to decrease our risk of strokes. What are some steps that we can take to do that? How are some ways to identify that we may be having a stroke, or to identify a loved one may be having a stroke. And again, most importantly, that I like to talk about are steps and lifestyle changes that could decrease your risk, and things that we need to be aware of and monitor health-wise. So until that time, see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.